Okay, let's continue working on the voting functionality. And in this video, I want to check if the idea is voted for by a certain user. So in this case, the logged in user. So if you take a look at the design, if an idea is voted for by the logged in user, then the number of votes changes to blue and also the button changes to blue. So this should happen on this page and also the show page here. So let's work on that. So I'm going to start with the show page here. So let's go into that. And how about we write a test first? I usually write my tests after, like you've seen, but let's try working with a TDD workflow, at least for the unit test. So like I said, we want to check if an idea is voted for by a particular user. So how do we want our API to look? So I'm thinking something like this. So we have an idea and we check if is voted by user, and then we pass in a user or a user ID. So let's make something like this work. So I'm going to grab this, and this is going to be on the idea model. So let's make a unit test for idea. PHP artisan make test. Let's call it idea test, and let's make sure it's a unit test. Okay, let's go to that idea test, and let's get rid of this. I need to use factories, so let's use refresh database. And we also want to extend Laravel's test case here. So let's go ahead and write our test. Let's call it can check if idea is voted for by user. Okay, and let's just paste that API I had. And in this case, I want to assert that this is true. So let's go ahead and use that assertion, assert true. Okay. And I'm just going to paste in the setup here. So we have an idea, a user, and everything that we need for that. So I have two users here. Let's import user. And let's import everything else we need. So category and status and also idea. So two users. And this is just so the idea works. And we have one idea. So let's also create a vote, because as of right now, there's no votes in the system. So let's say vote factory create. And let's just say the idea ID is this idea that we created. And then the user ID is this user that we created, or the first user. So user ID. So now, after we implement this functionality, this should actually pass. So let's import vote. And let's see our first error. First error is not related to what we're doing. I just have to add classes here. Run that again. Okay, so now we get this is voted for by user is an undefined method. So let's go ahead and define that on the idea model. So is voted for by user, or is voted by user is what I named it. So let's make a method is voted by user, and let's pass in a user. We can also pass in a user ID, but user is fine for now. And let's just return true here. Let's make our test pass. And let's run the test again. Okay, so now it's passing. So let's add another case here in our test. So the other case is for the other user. So it should assert false. Is voted for by the user that didn't vote for anything. So this should return false again. Now if we run our test, it should fail. Okay, so let's go ahead and work on the actual functionality. So how do we check if a user voted for an idea? So all we have to do is check the votes table and check if an idea exists based on the user ID. So in this case, the user ID is the logged in user. So that's pretty straightforward. Let's go ahead and write the code for that. So let's go ahead and query the votes table. So vote where user ID is user ID, and also where idea ID is this ID, because we are on the idea model. Okay. And forgot my comma here. We can also use the exists method to check if a row is returned. So if a row is returned, this user voted for this idea, and if not, then they didn't vote for that idea. So let's go ahead and see if this works. Let's rerun that test. And now we are passing. So I want to handle one more case here, and that's when we pass in null, because null is the case when the user is not logged in. So let's see what we get. So let's try null, let's run the test. And I have a missing bracket. Let's run it again. Okay, so now we're getting must be an instance of app models user null given. So that's because of this. It's not accepting null. So we can just make it optional. So to do that in PHP, just put a question mark here. So let's rerun that test. And now we get a different error because we actually have to check if the user exists. So let's just do this. If not user, so if it's null basically, then return false. And if not, then go ahead and do what we did before. So again, oops, forgot the $. User, and let's run that test again. And now all three cases pass. Okay, so now let's actually make it work in the browser. So we want this to be blue and this to be blue in the show page, and then we'll work on the index page as well. So remember, this is a Livewire component. So let's take a look at that. So it's called idea show. And let's add one more piece of state here. Let's call it has voted. And let's initialize it in the mount method. So this has voted equals. And now we have that new method that checks if the idea is voted for by a particular user. So let's use it. Idea is voted by user. And we can pass in auth user. And if we're not logged in, then that should be null and it should return false. So that case should be handled. So now we can make use of this piece of state in the view. So idea show. So let's start with the text here should be blue. So it should be, what's it called? Votes or votes count. So I keep forgetting if this one is the mobile one or the desktop one. So let me just put something in there. So this one's the desktop one, okay? So we just gotta add a conditional in the classes here. So let's do that. So if has voted, then the text should be blue. So we have text blue as a class, and we can end the if. Okay, does that work? And we're not logged in. So that case is working when we pass in null. So let's go ahead and log in. Okay, so now I believe the one with my gravatar here, there's 20 votes and I should have voted for this one. So it should be blue, and it is cool. For the other ones, for example, I didn't vote for this one. No one did. It should still be 0. I mean, not blue. Okay, so that is working. Let's continue with this one. Also make sure to add this for the mobile view. So this should be blue as well, or the 20. So same thing. Let me just grab this. And that should be the other place where there's a votes count right here. So let me just paste that in. And okay, does work. Let's add the button here. So it should be blue. So in this case, there's two conditionals. There's the class and also the text here. So I'm just going to put the conditional on the button, even though there's some duplication there. For me, it's easier to read. So let's do if has voted, and then we can do the else case as well. And we can put this in the else case. Okay. And let's copy this, put this in here. So this one, the text is voted. The BG is BG blue. Same with the border, or we can remove the border, but I'll keep it. Make sure it's blue. And also the hover, that should be blue. Hover, blue hover. Okay, and let's see if this works. So this is for the mobile case. Should be text white as well. So let's add that after here. Okay, so it does work. Let's do it for the desktop as well. So let me just grab these classes. Okay, and let's look for the votes count or the other one. Okay, so it's this button here. So we're basically doing the same thing. So if has voted, and then the else case remains the same, we move this in there, and then copy this, paste it in here. The text is voted, and then we have a few extra classes here. So I'm removing the gray, adding the blue. This is the blue as well, border blue, and hover BG blue hover. Blue hover. Is it BG blue hover? Yeah, BG blue hover. I don't think I did that for the other one. Let's just see if the desktop works. Okay, so it's voted. Hover works. Let me fix the hover for the other one. So it's this one here. Let me just double check that. Okay, cool. So let's make sure that it's still the same for something I didn't vote for. And it is cool. So yeah, that's working on the show page. So now we have to make it work on the index page. So same deal here, blue text and blue vote button if we voted for it. So that's the idea index Livewire component. And we can do something similar, but we'll get an n+1 issue again. So let's do that first. So let's go to idea index. And let's just grab what we have from idea show. So has voted. So let's paste that in here. So now we have that new piece of state. And let's add that to our view. So idea index. So same deal here. So if has voted, then we can add text blue. So I'm not sure if this is the mobile or desktop. We'll see in a second. Okay. So take note of the queries here. So we have 6, refresh, and I have an error. Has voted is undefined. And I forgot to add it here. So let's do that. Public has voted. Okay. Let's try that again. So it's 6 queries. And now we're up to 16. So again, we have the n+1 issue because for each one of these, we're performing a new query. So it's not a huge deal for this app in particular because we have pagination. But let's see how we can get rid of that and optimize our queries. So if you take a look at our idea controller, we had the same issue with the votes count, and we fixed it with this with count method that Laravel provides. So let me just remove this has voted for now. I'll leave it in there. Actually, no, let me just take it out for now. We can leave this, but let's take this out. And let's remove it from the index. So we'll do this later. Okay. And we should be back down to 6 queries or whatever it was. Okay. So if you take a look at the queries being run here, you'll see the one where we do, or where we get the votes count. So let me just grab this and we'll take a look at the raw query in SQL Ace. So let's go to queries or query and let's paste that in. And let me just reformat this for you and make the text bigger. Okay, so that's the same query, but I reformatted it. So let's go ahead and run that. Let me get rid of this limit 11. Okay. So as you can see, this method that Laravel provides, so the with count method is actually performing a subquery, and you can see that right here. So this subquery is responsible for grabbing the votes on this particular idea. And what this does is it adds a new column right here called votes count, so we can use it directly. And there is no more n+1 issue because this votes count is associated with the query, or the one query that we did here, this query. Okay, so we want to do pretty much the same thing, but with a new column. And that new column has information about whether the user, so in this case, the logged in user, voted for each particular idea. So essentially, it's just going to be a Boolean that tells us if the user voted for this idea, yes or no, this idea, and so on and so forth. So yeah, it's going to be a new column, like I said. So how are we going to do that? So similar to what we did in the idea model with this query here. So this is basically how you tell if a user voted for a particular idea. So let's do that in raw SQL. So let me just comment this out and let's do that. So it's basically select, and let's do star for now, from the votes table where user ID equals whoever's logged in, let's just say 1, and idea ID, let's say 2, because I have that set to only vote for even ID votes in my seeder. So this should result in a row, and it does. But if there is no idea, then it should result in no row. So 1, there's no idea, and it's nothing. So we have to incorporate this into this query above using a subquery. So let's see how we can do that. So when making use of subqueries, you want to return only one column. So it doesn't matter what column, so I'm just going to select the ID, and it's going to be the same thing. So it's going to be null if there is no result, but if there is, then it will return an ID. In this case, there it is right there. So let me just format this so it's on its own line, and that should still work, and it does. And now let's incorporate this into the query above. Let's put this back, and let's put it underneath the other subquery. So after this, and I believe we need a comma here, and let's put it in brackets. Let's paste it in, and let's alias it. So as, let's say, voted by user. So let's see if this works. And it looks like it does. Cool. So now we should have that new column that tells us if this particular user, so in this case 1, voted for this idea. Okay, so we're getting 1 for each of these results, which is not correct because we have to change this idea ID. So we don't want to hard code that. We want to grab the ID from the parent query. So to grab that, it's just ideas from up here, .id. So let's see if that works. Okay, and now it looks like it works. So this particular idea was voted for by the user because it's not null. This one too, and now this one's null, so it wasn't voted for, and so on and so forth. Okay, so that looks good. But how do we write this in Laravel? So there is a section in the documentation for subqueries. And if you take a look at the syntax here, we can do something similar. So let's go ahead and write that. So back to our idea controller. So let's put it before the with count. And let's say add select. And voted for user is what the alias is. Voted by user, sorry. So that's pretty much this part of the query right here. And let's say vote select ID. So that's this part. And let's import vote. And let me put this on its own line. We can do where user ID is, say, auth ID, so the logged in user. Okay. And that should be null if the user is not logged in. And then we can do where column idea ID is ideas.id. So that's basically what I just showed you right here. Okay, so let's see if this works. Actually, let me just die and dump this so we can see if we get that new column. So let's do this. And let's see if we get that new column. So back here, let's refresh. And the items are in here. There are 10 of them. And let's check. So it looks like we do. Right here. So voted for by user, or voted by user. So in this particular case, the user voted for this idea. So it's pretty much the same result as what we have here. So 50. So next one should be 1001. And then the one after that should be null. Okay, right here, 1001. And then this one should be null. Actually, no, not null, it's 49. Is that right? Yeah, next one should be null. So let's verify that. And it is. Cool. So it looks like it is working. So let's get rid of the die and dump. And now we have access to this new column. So we can just reference that in our idea show livewire component. Or sorry, idea index livewire component. So instead of doing this, which is an extra query, we can use that new column. So it's called voted by user. Idea voted by user. Okay. And auth user. So now let's see if the queries or the number of queries doesn't go up by too much. Actually, it shouldn't go up at all. Okay, so we get an error. What do we get here? Sorry, we no longer need to pass this in. Let's try that again. Okay, so we still have 6 queries, but now we should have that has voted piece of state, and we can do the same thing we did in the show view. So let's try that. So I guess I can put this back or redo. Yeah, let's put this back. So I think this is for the mobile view. Let's see. Okay, so it doesn't change, but let's check mobile. Should be blue on mobile. Okay, and it is. So that's the mobile view. So let's fix desktop as well. Grab this. Let's look for votes count. And let's paste it in here. Okay. And now it should be blue for the ones I voted for. Cool. So we can do the same thing for our vote button. So it should be voted. So again, it's this button here. So we can put a conditional on this. Has voted. Let's put the else case. And let's put this existing one in there. Okay. And let's copy this. Put it in here. This should be voted. Should be text blue. Not text blue, BG blue. Text white. And the border should be blue. Hover, BG blue. Hover. Okay. So this should work for desktop. And it does. So they're blue for the ones I voted for. And it's looking good. I'm going to do the same for mobile. You don't have to watch me do that. And there it is for mobile. Cool. Let's make sure that this still works when we're not logged in. So right now I am logged in. And when I'm not logged in, there should be no blue here. And it looks like it's working. Cool. Okay, one more quick thing. I know this video is long, but I want to write one more test for the functionality that we just added. So let me duplicate this. I'm in my vote show page test. And it's basically going to be the same for the index as well. So let's name this user who is logged in shows voted if idea already voted for. Okay, so we have all this set up here. Let's go ahead and vote for that idea. So I believe I did that in the idea test. So let's just grab that. Okay. Put it here. So this user voted for this idea. Okay. And now we can test the idea show class, but we want to make sure we're logged in. So we can use the acting as method, acting as the user. Okay. Let's test this. We're passing in the idea and the votes count. Okay, so that's the same. And now we are asserting that has voted is true. So that new piece of state that we added. So say has voted true. And we can assert that we see the text voted. Or you can also assert the HTML if you want, but I'm okay with just the text. Okay. So did I do that correctly? Semicolon. Let's run that test. Hopefully it does work. Okay, so it does. So let's double check. So if I didn't vote for that idea, it should fail. So let's comment that out, rerun the test, and it does fail because has voted is false. Okay, so let's put that back. And I'm going to do the same thing for idea, but I'll just paste it in because it's pretty much the same thing. So the test is actually a bit different on the index page. So the only change I've made here is I changed the Livewire component. And the problem is we're testing the Livewire component in isolation. So here's the test for it. And the idea comes from here. So where we created it up here. However, we're doing that subquery in the controller right here. So it's adding these two new columns to the idea instance. And when we're testing it, it's not adding those two columns. So that probably doesn't make sense to you. So let me just show you what I mean. So let's go to our idea index Livewire component and let's just die and dump the idea here. So this idea is not going to have the votes count and it's not going to have voted by user. So let's run that test. And there you see there are only 9 fields here, and there should be 11 when we add those 2 new votes fields. So let's fix this and let's make sure to hit that part of the controller that adds those 2 new fields. So let's get rid of this die and dump. Actually, let's leave it in there so we can see it work. So we're actually not going to make use of this idea here, but we'll leave it in anyways. Okay, so let's visit that route. So let's say response, this acting as, so logged in. We can make use of the user. And we're going to visit the index route. So get idea.index, okay? So when we do that, we can actually grab the actual data. So where is it? We can grab this data from the response. So let's do that. Actually, we are making use of this because by the time we get to here, there's one idea in the system. Okay, so let's do idea with votes. So this idea will have those 2 new fields. So let's just say response ideas. Actually, that should be an array like this, okay? And let's just die and dump that for now to see if we are getting the correct thing. Okay, let's run this test. Sorry, this should be route here. Let's add that. Try again. Okay, so now what are we getting? Okay, so this die and dump is coming from the Livewire component. But if you look here, we do have those 2 new fields. Okay, so let's get rid of that for now. So this die and dump right here, actually just get rid of it because we know it exists. But now let's die and dump response ideas. Okay, so what do we get here? So we have a field named items, and that is a collection. So let's see if we can grab that. Items, let's run that again. Okay, so that's a collection of all of our ideas. Let's see. And it looks like it is. We only have 1. So let's grab the first one. So this should be an idea with those 2 new votes field attached to it. Okay, let's run that again. So that's an array. So can we just do 0 here? Okay, so looks like that works. Okay, so this is an idea, but this idea now has these 2 new votes fields. Okay, so now instead of passing in this original idea, then we can pass in this new one. So idea with votes. So now this should work, hopefully, after all that explaining. Okay, so it does work. So yeah, we just had to make sure that we were going through the idea controller here to get those 2 new votes fields that we added using subqueries. So let's go ahead and run our entire test suite to make sure everything is still working. And some stuff is now failing. So this test is failing So yeah, I think it's because of these two assert C HTML. So this is pretty brittle. I mean, you can add it if you want, if you don't change it often, but you can either remove it. So let's try removing it first and see if it passes. Or you can update the HTML. Okay, so now it passes. So I believe we just added the text blue to these HTML elements. And I believe it's at the end. So again, this is pretty brittle. You can add them if they give you more confidence. See if this passes. And it doesn't. Actually, no, this is text blue is for when you're logged in and you voted for it. So in this case, we're not logged in. But that should still pass, no? So I believe there's an extra space here. So if you take a look at the code, let's see if this works. We are adding a space here and then we're doing the conditional. So if I were to remove the space, maybe that would work. Let's see if the test passes if I add the space. And it does. So that further proves my point that using these types of assert C HTML can be very brittle if you're changing that element often. So yeah, I'm just going to remove it. This is enough confidence for me to know that it's working correctly. So let's just remove those. And let's run the suite again. Oops, forgot my semicolon. And I believe the same thing for the index page. So 97. Yeah. So I'm going to remove these. And now everything is passing. Cool. So yeah, that took longer than expected. Let's go ahead and finish up and make a commit. So it's git add, git commit. Actually, what is this? 19. Git commit episode 19. Check if idea voted for.